plot. So the story centres around Jay Gatsby and his relatively poorer neighbour Nick Carraway, who lives opposite next door. The book itself is fundamentally about the relationship between, I would say, the three main characters in it are Daisy Buchanan, who lives across the water in a very lavish part of New York called East Egg. Jay Gatsby, who lives in West Egg across the other side of the water, and Nick Carraway himself, and is about Jay Gatsby and Daisy Buchanan's relationship before the war, because this is set in the 20s in New York. Most of the plot comes from that Daisy from having a relationship with the once poor Jay Gatsby, formerly James Gatz, before the war. He goes off to the war, and then a number of years later, 4 or 5 years later, he tries to get back into Daisy's life, having come back from the war, a very successful war hero. He's got many different medals. He's got a hell of a lot more money now that is we don't really know all too much about. He's a fairly enigmatic character. But Daisy has since moved on with her life by and large, and is with a fairly wealthy man called Tom Buchanan. Although it all seems well from the point of view of Nick Carraway, who the story is told from the point of view from, we soon learn that all is not very well at all. So Tom Buchanan, Daisy's husband, is actually cheating on Daisy fairly conspicuously with someone called Myrtle Wilson, who lives in a pretty more rubbish part of town, who has a husband as well. And Daisy seems thoroughly disenchanted with the kind of life that she has, even though she has absolutely everything that anybody could want or would want on offer. She's disenchanted with her life, even though she's got all the wealth and can lead a complete life of hedonism if she would like to. So among this kind of scandal going on, because Nick Carraway knows Tom Buchanan from university, I believe at Harvard, I think, and Daisy is his cousin. He is invited to one of Jay Gatsby, his neighbour's parties, but he's the only one who actually receives an invitation. Everyone else seems to come up there uninvited every weekend and has a massive ball of a time. And everyone at the party is giving different accounts of James Gatsby. So they're saying that he's a German spy, or he did incredible things in the war, or he's done this and that and the other, all of which are contradictory and somewhat false. No one really knows what exactly the kind of character that Jay Gatsby is until Nick eventually meets him. Through meeting someone Nick Carraway met at Tom and Daisy's residence a few days earlier, a female golfer called Jordan Baker. He talks with Jay Gatsby for a time, and then Jordan Baker gets called away, and when she comes back, she starts talking about how Jay Gatsby wants to reignite his romance with Daisy Buchanan that he had before the war, and he wants Nick to arrange a fairly inconspicuous meeting between the two, where he just turns up and she gets to see him for all his success and what he's worth now, how he's turned his life around, how he's a completely more famous and successful and rich person than he was before, even though he gave her the idea when they were together before the war that he was someone from a certain kind of family or background, a very well-off background. But he's trying to now prove that he's worthy of Daisy by being on Tom Buchanan's level of success and money, and that's what. A few weeks later, everyone, Jordan Baker, Nick Carraway, Tom Buchanan, Daisy Buchanan and Jay Gatsby are all in New York, and Jay Gatsby and Daisy begin to tell Tom that they've essentially been having an affair, and there's a lot of emotional things that happen during that scene, but in particular, Tom Buchanan mentions how he's had Gatsby investigated, and it turns out that a lot of his money is based on fraud and corruption and scandal, and isn't easily earned or earned the hard way that he thinks it should be earned. And all of this sets Daisy off to be quite emotional, and she's quite scared, so she thinks she might get back with Tom. But Jay Gatsby and Daisy Buchanan drive home, and in the emotional argument that they're having on the way home, they run over Myrtle Wilson, the woman that Tom Buchanan was having an affair with. And as Tom, Jordan Baker and Nick Carraway come back in the car, they find out that Myrtle Wilson has been run over, and Tom Buchanan kind of suggests very much that it was Jay Gatsby who did the running over. It actually turns out that it was Daisy, once we find out a bit later from Gatsby himself. Nevertheless, Tom Buchanan manages to convince Myrtle Wilson's husband that it was Jay Gatsby, and he then gets incredibly upset and finds Jay Gatsby, manages to kill him with a pistol and then kill himself. And that's the kind of tragedy that's of the plot itself, or a summarisation of the plot. Three main characters in this are Nick, Daisy Buchanan and Jay Gatsby, although Tom Buchanan has a fairly large part to play and so does Jordan Baker. But the three main ones that I'll talk about a little bit are Jay Gatsby, Daisy Buchanan and Nick Carraway. Nick Carraway is actually written incredibly well because he manages to portray exactly what we should be feeling as an audience. He's the kind of objective leader in this sense, and his view of exactly who these people are, what their personalities are, what their worth is incredibly accurate insofar as what the reader's perception of what the different characters in the book are. So he views Gatsby as a very good man. He's worthy of a lot. He's above all the rest of it, although he's enshrouded in the same kind of like hedonism and wealth and success, which later in the book Nick Carraway has a quite distasteful. And although not immediately he's disillusioned with what exactly is going on in the book, by the end of it he's fundamentally changed, and he thinks that the deceit and lies and power and corruption that come along with this success and money that is viewed as in the book as the kind of American dream, it's just not worth anyone who's trying to get there, to get to that position. They're not worth it, and the dream itself isn't worth it. It's just an aspiration that just degrades your moral character ultimately. So Jay Gatsby himself is this archetype of someone who has kind of succeeded in the American dream, that he's become was a very poor lad and then made himself into a very large and successful and well-off figure in society. One of the biggest names in New York at the time, was very well known, liked, respected, but this all comes at quite a price, as we see through Nick Carraway's lens on him. He sets himself morally above the rest of the people that he surrounds himself with, because he is just a better person, and that's not all that he should really be about. And the major part of it is that he's romanticised this ideal that he himself doesn't realise, but Nick Carraway realises is that the dream itself, the American dream, is not worthy of Jay Gatsby, sorry. And this idea, the symbolism of the green light that he keeps chasing in Daisy, in this really fickle character who doesn't actually love him the same way that he loves her, it's just not worth what he thinks it's worth. It's not even worth his own character, and ultimately he pays the price for it because he dies. The American dream itself has kind of blotted his character and changed what he actually should be, or what he potentially could be. So Daisy Buchanan is shown to be fickle, bored, impatient, flittering between different emotions, doesn't seem to care too much about the child that she has in the book. She devotes a couple of sentences to it and that's about it. It just shows the kind of person that she is, given that she has everything at her disposal, absolutely everything at her disposal. Even though Tom Buchanan is an imperfect husband to her, he has given her a lot over that time, and she has an incredible amount of money and wealth and power and success, but she's not happy with it herself, and that's shown to be a kind of reflection of that when you do get to this peak, when you do succeed in the American dream, it's not something that you're fundamentally happy with by the end of it, and that's what corrupts society in itself, because everyone is cold-hearted and viewing everything through numbers and power and money and wealth, or materialism, but ultimately isn't looking at things in the moral perspective or how well people are doing around them. It's just about worshipping who has the most power and money and respect and influence. And Daisy's actions herself show to undermine exactly this idea that the American dream isn't worth it, because Jay Gatsby, who loves her or is in love with her and has been for 5 years, he shows a certain kind of love for her which is devoted above everything else, and she lets him take the fall for the death of Myrtle Wilson. Doesn't have anything much more to do with him, distances herself from him, even though he's done absolutely everything that he possibly could and gotten from the very bottom to the very top just for her. She doesn't even show any appreciation for what he's done in his mind to try and get or win her affection. So the two main themes in this, one of them would be money and success and how they're conflated to be the same thing. You're very successful if you have money, and you can't be successful if you don't have money. Viewed through this kind of lens, you can see how it's quite pertinent to exactly the situation in the 20s, and is a very good overall grand narrative of this kind of upper class society. And the other thing would be aristocracy and exactly how the upper class got to where they were, because they've traded in this sense of any kind of real morality or concern for others, and like I said before, very cold-heartedly concerned with money and what other people can give to their own power, or who is taking the most power or wealth, or who has the most materialistic jewels, so to speak. And overall, it's making men, this kind of culture, do extraordinary and unethical things, and trading their morality in for something that's it is at bottom materialistic and unworthy of what fundamentally the story is about. Money over love, or money over people, and this feeling of success over a love worth having in the relationship between Daisy and Jay Gatsby. My own particular thoughts on the book itself is that the vibrancy of the pages could very easily be turned into a kind of Broadway or theatre production, and I think it could be, maybe that's already been done, that could be quite an ignorant statement to make, but I think it could very, very easily be translated into a kind of theatre production, and the almost like script itself, as you would call it, is quite masterful. Although I think one of the other points when I think about it is that this is often hailed to be in a kind of top 3 or top 5 or even top 10 literature productions in the last 100 years, and I don't think I'd really agree with that. I think it's a very good book. It's got a very pertinent narrative, very understanding of the culture of the 1920s. It's very colourful, and it's shown through a lot through the kind of Baz Luhrmann adaptation, and how easily you could do that in such a modern day, almost 100 years after it was set. Even though the film is still set in the 20s, it's an incredibly vibrant and an exciting book, and quite easy to get through as well. I think it's a very good book to understand and study at GCSE or maybe even A levels at a slightly higher point, but I don't think that it quite holds the same candle to deeper understandings or narratives on human nature or society or culture than things like Dostoevsky, or deeper insights into those kinds of narratives. Although I think it's very good for a certain age group, like I say GCSE and A level, it's a really good book to understand it through that lens, and it's well measured by how 15 and 16-year-olds could understand it through the archetypal themes that it portrays. The characters in it are also very centralised. They have a clear message in the personality that they have, and the generalisations that those characters seem to get across about exactly the kind of people that New York or upper classness or aristocracy is filled with. So I think it's very good in that sense. It is a very good book. I do recommend it, and it doesn't take too long to get through. It's maybe 150 odd pages, and it's not difficult to read either. The word "gay" is actually mentioned in it a lot, which is when you think about it in the kind of context it's used now, you hear "gay" every few pages, and you're like, "Oh, that's a bit strange." But it is a very good book. Not hard to understand. It's not like old Shakespeare or old English. It's not archaic language, and I should be do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep next. Yeah, thank you. If you've got any opinions yourself, or you want to voice anything about The Great Gatsby that I might have missed, or any of its clearer messages or insights into the characters, just let me know. Thank you.